One of the other parts of early MLS was the first ever expansion team, or first set of expansion teams, really. We're talking the Chicago Fire in 1998, joining the league with Miami Fusion, which is funny because you see one that didn't make it and one that probably, with recent results, feels like it wouldn't have been a terrible thing if they didn't make it, right? But I say that as a joke. Please don't come after me. You talk about expansion teams and you have this combination of good and bad. It always is. You either got Atlanta, LAFC. Apparently, we're throwing St. Louis in there. Jury's still out. Who get hot from the start. They never look back. And then you get Minnesota, FCC Orlando. They need some time to get adjusted and get going. I would say that the 98 Fire definitely fell into the first group. From day one, they were a force to be reckoned with both in the league and the League Cup. And in 1998, they went and won them both. And this is a story of how it happened. We're going to start in the league. As we mentioned, they were newcomers with Miami Fusion, and they were tossed into the Western Conference. Miami was in the East. They joined the West. And of course, when you have expansion teams, it's MLS. There's only one thing we can do. We got to have a draft. We got to start drafting some players. If you aren't allowed to do anything until you draft something. You have to draft a name. The Fire would get themselves a couple players that would be important, but none more important than Zach Thornton from the New York, New Jersey Metro Stars. Once again, the Metro make the world take, and you'll see why that matters in a minute. They built the rest of their team as quoted as to reflect the diversity of their city, adding a ton of Polish internationals, including Peter Nowak, Roman Kosecki, and Jerzy Podbronzy. Yeah, didn't mess that one up. Along with a ton of strong U.S. internationals, including legendary Red Bull manager Chris Armas, legendary Red Bull manager Jesse Marsh, Josh Wolf, and OK Austin manager CJ Brown, Ante Razov, and Frank Klopas, who is also a manager in this league. One of the stories we're going to have to tell at some point, sorry, completely off topic here, is how Chicago bred like every manager in MLS. Because I feel like every time you look at a manager in MLS, somebody has a tie to the Chicago Fire of pre-2000. It's ridiculous. The best part of all of this, though, they were led by the biggest, baldest head in managerial coaching, Bob Bradley. Shiny dome, big brains, big dreams, Bob Bradley. We get to the start of the season, and it was all right. They won their first two games. They played new expansion side Miami and then Tampa Bay. Both beat them by a score of 2-0. It was then followed by 5 straight defeats, leaving them joint bottom of the table at the time. Right now, you're thinking, okay, it's a classic expansion season. They're going to start off okay. They're going to fall to the bottom. It's going to take them some time to get going. Bobby B found a way to turn them around. They would go on to win their next 12 games in a row by a combined score of 31-8. They weren't just beating teams, they were murdering. At the end of this 12-game run, Podbronzy ended with 6 goals, Nowak ended with 6 goals, Kosecki ended with 5 goals, and Razov ended with 5 goals. So that's 22 of the 31 goals that they scored from their 4 big players. They were clicking at a rate no one would have ever expected. At the end of this 12-game run became the start of a second, and that would be the US Open Cup. Right at the end of their 12-game win streak, they were scheduled to play their first US Open Cup game versus local rivals, the Chicago Stingers, a PDL side that had just upset USL A-League side, the Hershey Wildcats. If you remember correctly, we had a certain guest on our podcast who played on that team. I don't know if it was that specific team, but the timeline's right. That would be John Bush for anybody who didn't pick that up. I forgot Connor was muting himself through this whole thing, so I was waiting for a response, and it didn't happen, but that's okay. The Fire handled them easily, 3-1, wasn't really a test. And then 3 weeks later, they were matched up against fellow MLS team San Jose Clash. Lubos Kubik and Jeff Bacher traded goals, that got them to extra time and eventually a penalty shootout, which in 1998 was way better than they are now. Big 35-yard run-ups. San Jose would end up missing. It would be Eric Winalda, scorer and focus of our first ever MLS history retold, and a man named Go, missing for San Jose, while Chicago took 4 of their 5 away to move on. They would get to the next round to take on the Dallas Burn. And this is one of the reasons why we're telling this story, because it's first off, the US Open Cup, you will figure out, is very, very poorly archived. You can very rarely find highlights of these games. Secondly, it's 1998. Nothing is highlighted or archived or anything like that. So it's even tougher to find 1998 games. And I'm very upset about it because this game needs a 30 for 30. It's August 4th, 1998, in a game that would help go on to create the first ever fan-created rivalry in MLS, the Brimstone Cup. And we will cover that later in a future episode. Chicago Fire, Dallas Burn. This game was unbelievably chippy. And as I mentioned earlier, it had 45 total fouls, 18 for Chicago, 27 for Dallas. Ante Razov and Mickey Trotman would trade goals in the first 25 minutes of the game before getting to the halftime break even. Then things get really fun. In the 52nd minute, our favorite US U20 manager, Jason Kreis, who has never failed our country ever, gets himself sent off for a challenge from behind. 4 minutes later, Roman Kasecki would give Chicago a 2-1 lead. Fast forward to the 66th minute, Diego Gutierrez would also be sent off for Chicago. There is nothing about what he got sent off for, but he was sent off with a straight red. This left the field to be 10v10. 5 minutes later, something happens, and again, I have no idea what it is, but Roman Kasecki gets a yellow card and then a straight red within the same minute. The 71st minute saw him get a yellow and then a direct red after that. Whether he pushed somebody, punched somebody, I don't know, but he got himself sent off, meaning it was now 9v10 in favor of Dallas. Chicago up 2-1, but down a man. 4 minutes later, Kubik gets put through on goal, and he scores a third goal. It is 3-1 now for Dallas. Dallas then earn a penalty kick in the 83rd minute, convert it, make it 3-2. They keep pushing, but Chicago holds on to get to the final of their first ever US Open Cup in their first ever try. If they wanted to win it, all they would need to do would take down the Columbus Crew and they would have their first piece of silverware. However, because scheduling is so good in MLS, it wouldn't happen for another 2 months. They played 4 games in 1 month to get to this point and then had to wait 2 whole months to get to the next game. So we jump back. Let's go back to MLS days. After their 12-game win streak, you saw Chicago get very streaky. They went on a 5-game losing streak, then a 4-game win streak, then they won 3 of their last 5. They ended up making the MLS playoffs as the 2nd seed in the West, 3rd overall on the table, and earning an automatic qualification spot to the 1998 version of the CONCACAF Champions League. I believe it's called the CONCACAF Champions Cup or something like that. In their first season ever, not a bad return, I will say. But really, as people know, or people claim, I'm going to put air quotes around that, the regular season doesn't matter. It's all about your playoffs, right? So, after being 2nd in the West, their first game was drawn against Colorado. In 1998, MLS playoff system was a best-of-3 series, home, away, then home, win 2 and move on. Chicago gets Colorado, and in the first game, Kubik and Saenz would trade goals before getting to PKs, where the world's greatest American manager, Jesse Marsh, converted the winner to give them the first game in hand. In second game, Kubik also stepped up and put a penalty kick away in the 24th minute, and that would be enough to get them to the conference finals versus the LA Galaxy. These guys are going on runs that people, against teams that you would think would just send them home, and this is one of those games against LA. In game 1, they got dominated. I mean, I'm pretty sure the shots were like 15-2 on goal. However, those 2 shots were very important. In the 86th minute, Kubik took a free kick right at the goal. That was their first shot on goal. That was parried right into the path of the greatest American manager of all time, Jesse Marsch, who would put the second shot on goal into the net. In the 86th minute, after being dominated, they would take game 1 miraculously. I mean, this was an LA team that was stacked all over the place. I mean, they blew the team out of the water. They won the Supporter Shield this year, and it wasn't even close. The move over to game 2. It's back at Soldier Field, and they just need 1 win to get to the very last game of the year. In the 31st minute, Peter Novak finishes off yet another rebound from Razov. Excuse me. To give Chicago the early lead. Minutes later, Danny Pena was wide open on the far side of the box for LA Galaxy to level the game from a Kobe Jones cross. This game, too, would head to PKs, where expansion draft pick Zach Thornton, who was the second goalkeeper taken, by the way, behind Kevin Hartman, he was once again the man of the hour, making 3 straight saves to help the Fire get to the MLS Cup final. Want to win the first ever MLS Cup in your first ever try? What better way to do it than take on league giants DC United in the final? It's a one-legged game in front of 51,000 people at a neutral site called the Rose Bowl. I don't know if you ever heard of it. Oh, the Rose Bowl. That's right. Because we couldn't not put it where everything was happening, right? In the 29th minute, Polish connection converts. Novak slides the ball across to Podbronzy, who taps it home for a 1-0. Then, seconds before halftime, Novak drives forward with the ball and rifles a shot that hits the chest of Diego Gutierrez and deflects into the net, giving Chicago a 2-0 lead. United would push, but Zach Thornton kept saying no, no, no. He made 6 saves in the last half of the game to keep a clean sheet and win Chicago their first ever MLS Cup. On a side note from the story, if you wanted to rewatch that game, there was a really cool sit down with Jesse Marsch, Peter Novak, and who was the announcer who was running it? It's on Facebook. It's on US Soccer's Facebook page. I can't find it right now, but it was a very good watch along. I suggest you go watch it if you enjoy that type of stuff. It was one of those games that they played during COVID, where it was like, okay, there's nothing on. Let's put all the old highlights on. So super neat. But they make it to the MLS Cup final. This game was played on 10/25/98. That date is important. MLS Cup was played on 10/25/28 because if they wanted to do what nobody thought they would do and win the double, they need to turn around and do it 5 days later against the Columbus Crew in the US Open Cup final. Because, again, instead of playing it in the middle of the season when you can move players around and not risk a playoff, they decided to take 2 months between the semifinal and the final of the US Open Cup and stick the US Open Cup final 10 days after or 5 days after the final, because why not? On October 30th, 1998, the Chicago Fire hosted the Columbus Crew, rolling out the same 11 that they did for MLS Cup 5 days earlier, ready for a challenge, and what a game it was. You can rewatch this whole game. Sorry, I lost my place there. You can rewatch this whole game with Jesse and Kloppus on US Soccer's YouTube page. That's what I was telling you before. Some of the key moments fall like this. In the 43rd minute, Josh Wolf was played in on goal. He takes a touch around a charging Jurgen Sommer, who takes him out completely, earns a yellow card, concedes a PK. Podbronzy steps up, tucks it home, and Chicago takes an early lead just before the break. Just 8 minutes after the restart, Crew legend Stern John stands over a free kick from 30 yards out. Thankful for football lines because I was able to measure it. It's tapped over to his direction, and he rifles this thing past Zach Thornton. An absolute firecracker from distance. Game is level. They would trade chances back and forth until we get to a sudden death extra time. That's right. Golden goal. One goal, winner take all. In the 99th minute, Podbronzy stands over a corner for Chicago. He sends in a cross that hits Razov in the head. It flicks his header towards goal, right to the feet of none other than Frank Klopas. He receives the ball from that header, finishes from close range, and completes the double in the first ever year of existence for the Chicago Fire. The story of the 98 Chicago Fire is one that most clubs can only dream of. Every new team is either being compared to Atlanta or LAFC, but the 1998 Chicago Fire set the standard for what an expansion team is meant to be. However, with the number of teams and the level of talent that we're bringing in each and every year, I don't think you'll ever see anything like this ever again. But when you want to talk about fairy tale starts, this is what they're made of.
So I got a question for you. After having done all that research, I know we're a little bit on track for it at the moment. Granted, it's very early, but do you think that my expansion teams can replicate that success? Not necessarily having to win the double. Do you think an expansion team in year one at this point in MLS could come in and win the cup in the first year?
I mean, if we keep passing it to their striker in front of our goal, then yeah, St. Louis can
Oh
win
boy,
whatever they
here we
want.
go.
But no,
That wasn't a segue for you to plug your agenda.
well, I mean, listen, you started it, I'm finishing it. Um, no, I don't think so. I think not with the current restrictions in place. If you go ahead and set this up where you bring in an expansion team the same year you say, okay, all strings are not attached. You go in, you get whoever you want, whenever you want, let's do it. Then we can think about it. But the way that the league is set up and how they have to be smart about who they bring in and how they balance a roster, no, I don't believe that that's something they can do.
Okay. I would agree with you.
Naturally, because I'm always right.
Nothing else to add.
Had to throw it in there.
Should I